Hey everyone, and welcome to the Sunny Go One Piece podcast. On this episode, we're going to be diving into episodes 659 through 661, which will cover manga chapters 727 through 729. And here we get the tragic history of Dressrosa's fall and the depths of Doflamingo's evil in these episodes. Alright, so quick synopsis. We get how Doflamingo sees the kingdom of Dressrosa from the Riku family, and this is finally revealed while the Straw Hats and the opposing forces finally get to regroup and decide how they will proceed forward before the shocking conclusion to the Doflamingo versus Law fight is revealed. Alright, so differences. Again, there's more filler with Bartolomeo and Luffy's interaction at the beginning of episode 659, and this was never present in the manga, and you actually don't see these two again until a little later when they've already met up with Zoro and Kinemon. Another change is there's an added moment that they put during the King Riku flashback that I didn't like. It's that moment where Captain Tank is watching the citizens hesitate to give the money, and he starts to grab his sword as if to say that he was prepared to take the money by force if they refuse, which never happens in the manga. And I don't like this because it kind of changes the way you see Captain Tank. Like, he's presented as this loyal and good guy on the part of King Riku, and I get that it was to show just how desperate he was that he was willing to cross that line, but I feel like they didn't need to show this because it was never present in the manga, and I think that the whole point was more to focus on how willing the citizens were and how kind they were and how much they trusted the royal family, and I think this kind of takes away from it. Captain Tank is not a huge character or anything, so in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't really change much, but it's just still kind of bothers me that they added this sort of, kind of negative aspect to him. Another interesting change that they added is when Bellamy is trying to sneak up to Luffy to assassinate him, in the anime they show Bellamy hesitating and then dropping the knife on the ground and then hiding really quickly. This moment doesn't happen in the manga as Dellinger gets to Bellamy before this even happens, and I'm torn about this addition because it just outright makes it very explicit that Bellamy had changed and wasn't going to harm Luffy. But in the manga, it's still left a little ambiguous whether he was actually going to do it or not. Now, you might say, well, it's pretty obvious he wasn't going to with all the setup Oda did, but he trusted his readers to be able to interpret that and come to that conclusion on their own, whereas the anime kind of treats its audience again like they're idiots who can't reason that out based on the clues that Oda has given us. But I guess this, because a lot of these changes is more specifically they're trying to make it very crystal clear to younger audiences who might have a harder time picking up on those smaller, subtle clues. Whereas, in the manga, usually manga is read by a little bit slightly older audiences, like anime is watched by 7, 8, 9, 10-year-olds, whereas manga generally is read by 10, 11, 12 and older. And so you get a little bit more of that, literacy and sort of, I guess, the ability to understand all of that. Whereas, really young kids who watch anime definitely probably wouldn't they wouldn't catch up on that. So yeah, I can understand this change, but it just sort of kind of irks me the wrong way. The last change that I wanted to mention is that, during the Doflamingo versus Law fight, particularly in episode 661, there are a lot of added scenes and a lot of added moments to that fight, which I don't necessarily mind. Particularly when Doflamingo is talking to Diamante over the Dendemushi. Law tries to attack him again, but gets shot in the legs with the string balls. This never happens in the manga. Law just kind of is on the ground, down for the count, while Doflamingo is talking to Diamante. So, again, I can completely understand why they added all of that to extend time out, but it's still annoying nonetheless. But yeah, those are the four main big changes that I noticed. There are obviously a lot of smaller changes that are present within the episodes, but those are the four big ones that I kind of wanted to highlight. So let's move on to the episodes themselves. To start, episode 659 sees us launch into a more detailed flashback of what really happened to Dressrosa and how it fell into Doflamingo's hand, but this time from the perspective of the toy soldier. And it really does paint the picture of a very prosperous and almost idyllic society where the government, or in this case, the monarchy, is very fair and supportive of its citizens. Even during a crisis like a prolonged drought, they have absolute faith in their king and do right by them. And there's no amount of cynicism in any of the people, and they helped each other out until one night. And the night that Doflamingo would descend to approach King Riku. And this scene has some pretty interesting details about how Doflamingo was able to become a Shichibukai by basically stealing and holding the Celestial Dragon's tribute money hostage, which is crazy. But Doflamingo also adds that the world government really didn't know how to control him, especially because as a former Celestial Dragon himself, he must have some dirt that he could potentially expose that would hurt them, which is probably why they just don't outright go after him with like a buster call or something. The deal and this whole situation that Doflamingo presents King Riku is just so cruel and just insanely twisted. He obviously was going to take Dressrosa back regardless of what method he chose, but he chose to do it in the most cruel and despicable method possible by turning the king and his citizens' good nature and kindness against them and exploiting it. This flashback is done so well in showing just how evil, manipulative, and dangerous Doflamingo is. He basically calculated everything, knowing exactly how to take down a kingdom as prosperous as Dressrosa is in literally one night. It's downright chilling to watch this episode. Not only that, it's heartbreaking to see when the citizens, with the absolute trust they had for Riku, they all just gave their money willingly, only to have that loyalty and faith be betrayed in the most ruthless and brutal way possible. It took 800 years to build this level of trust and good faith, but it only took Doflamingo one night to tear it down. It just was brutal. It's pretty tough to watch King Riku being forced to slaughter his own people that he loves so much and seeing how much pain is in his face. And you now know the reason why, despite fighting in the Colosseum, he won't wound anyone. Just like Rebecca, he uses only non-lethal tactics to subdue his opponents because he probably doesn't ever want to inflict that kind of pain on anyone. By the end of it, he'd rather someone kill him than being forced to kill any more of his citizens. And this flashback is pretty dark, especially the man that is holding his dead child yelling, "I hate King Riku." Like that moment. I'm pretty impressed that Oda actually drew that one panel of a man holding his dead child. It's pretty dark. It's also during this moment that we learn that Doflamingo's most famous ability is, he calls it the Parasite, which is a very appropriate name as he basically infects and takes over control of people, similar to like those fungal parasites that basically infect and control the bodies of their dead victims. And like Doflamingo's other attack names, there is a hidden ito or string in there. And in this case, if you say parasite with a Japanese accent, it's called parasaito. And that last part where you go parasaito is where it contains the word ito, which is the word for string in Japanese, as we've mentioned in the past. We've seen Doflamingo use this ability as far back as episode 151 during the Jaya arc in his initial introduction with Kuma at the Marine HQ, where he uses it on Vice Admiral Mozambia to attack Vice Admiral Stainless in his sort of initial introduction, where we're made to think that he may have psychic powers, but obviously he now has string powers to control people. And I particularly like the name Parasite for this move. Back at the palace, we see a young Violet, aka Prince Viola, confronting Monet, who has been posing as a maid working in the palace. And that combined with the fact that one of the palace aides mentioning that they need help from the Marines, and they called Virgo, not realizing that Doflamingo has essentially infiltrated all the key parts of Dressrosa for this plan to play out, as Monet welcomes the Don Quixote family into the palace. And I think one thing that caught everyone's eye with this moment is that while Dellinger and Baby 5 look much younger here, Sugar seems to be unchanged from this moment in time and has basically not aged a day in the 10 years since this happened, which at the time I really had no idea what that could mean or how that was possible, other than to assume it had something to do with her devil fruit power. When things are at their worst, though, Doflamingo and his officers appear as heroes and make it look like they're saving the country from King Riku's reign of terror, quote unquote. When the citizens start to mention that Doflamingo are pirates, it's very apparent that this is a gross perversion of what happens when Luffy and the Straw Hats arrive to save the day. People have the similar reaction that they're being saved by pirates and kind of are a little surprised by that. But in this case, Doflamingo is the one that caused all this to begin with. But what's even crazier, the parallel of this is that, like I've mentioned in the past, Dressrosa mirrors the Arabasta arc. And you'll notice that this is a Shichibukai who came into the country to discredit the sitting king and present themselves as a hero to the people and have them cheer their name. And this is essentially Crocodile's exact plan to take over Arabasta. Only Doflamingo actually succeeded this time, whereas Crocodile couldn't because of Luffy. And after this flashback from the toy soldier, Frankie is his usual self, completely overcome with emotion and willing to just fight alongside the toys and the Tontara against Doflamingo. And I love when Usopp is trying to rein him in, trying to remind him of what their actual mission. And when he turns to Robin for support and confirmation, the camera pans straight to Robin with this like very serious face saying, "I can't forgive Doflamingo," also ready to fight. And I like to think that seeing how similar this was to Crocodile's plan, how she had a big hand in causing so much pain in Arabasta, that Robin couldn't tolerate this yet again, and also felt like this was her chance to atone for her mistakes of the past while working under Crocodile in the Baroque Works organization. So I really kind of like that. And I know that this may just be my own personal interpretation of that, because there's no real confirmation of that now or later. But I really like kind of thinking that that's Robin's sort of motivation. And also because she probably finds the Tontara really cute, and she loves, cute things and wants to protect them. Of course, Usopp freaking out about Frankie and Robin's readiness to fight is pretty funny, but easily the funniest moment is when Leo and the toy soldier talk about the moment they were all filled with joy when they all found out that Doflamingo had abdicated the throne, but only to then be devastated that the news was false and that Doflamingo had not been abdicated. And the reactions of Usopp, Robin, and Frankie are absolutely gold as they realize that this was in part their fault that caused them this incredible, cruel twist of emotions, with all three of them, including Robin, making this exaggerated, horrified face, thinking internally, "We're so sorry for what we did." And I love that Robin is starting to make more of these faces alongside the rest of the crew. It's amazing. Luffy is eventually able to meet up with Zoro and Kinemon, but during this conversation, Bellamy all of a sudden shows up to fulfill his mission to assassinate Luffy for Doflamingo. But when it comes time to do it, he can't bring himself to go through with it, as he's grown to respect Luffy too much by this point. And like I mentioned in the differences section, I don't like that they added that one scene of him dropping the knife, but ultimately it really doesn't matter, since it's pretty obvious regardless that Bellamy wasn't going to betray Luffy at this point. Then Dellinger shows up to spill the beans, making it seem like an accident, when it's very clearly that he said all these things about how Doflamingo was never going to let him in and that he had no faith in him to begin with, just to torture him. Dellinger is someone who is cut from the exact same cloth as Doflamingo. This dude is straight up evil and cruel just for the sake of being evil and cruel. And it makes sense, since it looks like Doflamingo basically groomed Dellinger since he was a kid, based on that flashback from earlier during Dressrosa's fall. Before we can see what happens to Bellamy, it cuts back to Law fighting Doflamingo and Law. And in this fight, like it was mentioned earlier, Law has a limit to how much he can use his Devil Fruit powers, which during this he finally reaches that limit. And it's interesting to see this, because this is the first and only time there's been sort of a stamina limit associated with and put on a Devil Fruit power. We've seen Luffy exhaust himself, but it's never due to him stretching too much. It's always more about physical exertion, until he started to push his fruit to an extreme limit with his gears, particularly Gear 2nd. But even in that case, you can make the argument that it's not the stretching itself that's causing him to tire out, it's what the rubber body allows him to do, which is to pump blood extremely fast throughout his body, that's causing him to basically tire out. It's the quick circulation of the blood that's causing him to wear out, and not the stretching itself that's doing it. Chopper's Monster Point is probably the closest thing we've gotten to that, but that's another example of pushing the Hito no Mi to an extent that it was never naturally meant to do, with the help of drugs. And there is one more example that appears much later on, but my point is that I feel like Oda introduced this weakness to the Ope Ope no Mi because without it, it's just way too OP. And it was a way for Oda, from a story perspective, to rein it in a little bit and balance it out with the rest of the fruit. Because otherwise, that fruit is insanely strong, like I've talked about in the past. And it gets stronger, I feel like, the more Law shows off the different abilities. And I have to point out this one moment from this episode where Diamante calls Doflamingo on the Dendemushi. This has nothing to do with the previous conversation, but the level of filler and poor pacing is just out of control by this moment. Like, there's a moment where Doflamingo just stands there blankly staring at Law while his Dendemushi rings and rings and rings. Like, what the hell is this? I actually went back and counted how long this actually was. And from the moment he says his last line to when he picks up the Dendemushi, it was about 37 seconds. Like, Toei seriously left 37 seconds of dead time of just Doflamingo standing there with a blank stare, refusing to pick up his damn phone. And in the manga, the Dendemushi doesn't even ring. He just talks to Diamante like it's a walkie-talkie almost. Like, 37 seconds doesn't seem like that long, but when you're just sitting there with nothing happening on screen, just hearing over and over, it is a long ass time, and it's just really irritating when you're watching these. And I have to say, like, this is kind of about where, actually no, it was a little bit later, but this is when I really started to get kind of tired of the anime, and I really started to get annoyed and a little burnt out. And I would say in maybe about 10 to 15 more episodes is when I actually stopped watching the anime weekly. I just literally said, I'm done with this. I already know what's going to happen because of the anime, so I'm just going to wait for the Dressrosa arc to finish and then binge the rest at my own pacing, because it got so bad. It was just bad. And I did the same thing for the next arc too. I literally just waited for that entire arc, except for a few episodes where I wanted to see how they animated it. I would just let it play out, then binge the whole arc at the end of it. It's only until I got to the third arc after this where I actually did start to rewatch it weekly, because it did get better and the animation got better. And obviously I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but anyways, kind of getting back onto this, we do get a very intriguing conversation between the two as a result of this call from Diamante. Even with Viola turning on them, Doflamingo has already figured out what Law's plan is, but where Doflamingo takes one step further and shows just how sharp he is, he understands that Law isn't the type of person who would entrust something that vital to just any random person, and questions Law why he trusts the Straw Hats so much, because he knows that Law is a very cautious and very untrusting person. And at the time, Law's answer was pretty crazy, because for whatever reason, he seems to wholeheartedly believe in the will of D, saying, because I know the D will drum up a storm again. And this one statement begins to answer why Law has been so interested in Luffy, even so far as to stick his neck out to rescue and save him at Marineford, of all places, 2 years ago. It was because Luffy was a D, and Law saw something in Luffy. It's also probably why he puts up with so much of Luffy's bullshit. But what does he mean by again? To me, when I first read this, and even to this day, I think he's talking about Roger, and how he turned the whole world upside down with how he started the current age of piracy. And it wouldn't be that much of a stretch to know that he knows Roger's real name is Gold D. Roger. But he could also be alluding to Luffy's other crazy storms that he's caused, like NES Lobby, or Impelled Down, or Marineford, or all three of them. But like I said, I'm pretty sure he's talking about Roger here, and that he thinks that, just like a lot of other people believe, that Luffy is essentially the next Roger in terms of like the impact that he will have on the world. Except, unfortunately, it looks like this might be kind of the end for Law, as Doflamingo has him, but it cuts away to Luffy before we get to see what happens with Law. And when we do see what Luffy is up to, I love that his first conversation with Zoro is how butthurt Zoro is that Luffy didn't even think to invite him to this tournament. And I love that they really are like best friends. And despite how stoic and unflappable Zoro always presents himself, especially in the post-time skip era, he's still kind of kid at heart, especially when it comes to hanging out with Luffy. Like, he's just like this little kid that wants to hang out with his best friend. And I really like that. And because of this loud-ass conversation between the two, the Marines have completely caught on to the fact that it's Zoro and Luffy in disguise. But I bring this moment up because the conversation that Vice Admiral Maynard has with his subordinate is a nice bit of attention to detail as he reads off the list of potential outlaws that they want to catch in the Colosseum. They can no longer remember a few of the names and why they're even written down because they've been turned into toys and thus wiped from everyone's memory. And I really love that little detail. Anyways, with this, everyone is finally able to reconnect and understand the situation, and this moment will always bring me chills, and it came from a really unexpected character as it's Frankie who takes the lead. He's been so moved by the dedication of all the people who are bravely preparing to take back their home that he wants to help and even goes so far as to say that he is prepared to disobey his captain's orders if he has to. But of course, Luffy is in complete agreement that they have to help them, especially since Rebecca is such a good person who bought Luffy 3 meals. And this is that flexibility in Luffy's crew that I was talking about in the last podcast episode that makes this crew so special and strong. They're capable of being leaders in their own right. And when you think about it, aside from Nami and Chopper, they've all been leaders before they joined the Straw Hats. Zoro is just kind of a natural leader that has even had followers like Johnny and Yosak for a time. Usopp had his Usopp pirate crew. Sanji was the sous chef at the Baratier. Robin was, of course, the second in command of the Baroque Works as Miss All Sunday. Frankie was the head of the Frankie family. And Brook has probably the most mysterious one. He was not only the acting captain of the Rumbar Pirates, but he was also a captain of a battle convoy of a royal kingdom, which is something we don't know anything at all about. But Brook has been a leader in multiple facets. And so, yeah, Luffy has basically combined a lot of different leaders to serve under him. And of course, Nami and Chopper themselves are great leaders in their own right for their respective sort of specialties. So, yeah, I think that this is one of the things that make the Straw Hat crews really strong and flexible and adaptable, which is why they're so good even when they get split up. But anyway, they're all capable leaders, and Luffy allows them the freedom to think for themselves, and this is one of those situations. But of course, the other reason they work so well as a unit is because they all are pushing towards the same goal and care for each other enough that even if it is out of the way, they will go as far as to support each other, regardless of what they want and how ridiculous some of their requests are. And there's another really awesome moment like this in the next set of episodes that I wish I could talk about, but that'll have to wait as these episodes end on quite the cliffhanger that kind of shocked me when I first read it. So Doflamingo and Law land back at the main square in front of the Colosseum where Luffy, Zoro, and Kinemon are, with Law completely defeated, but in a shocking twist, Doflamingo seemingly finishes Law off by pumping him full of bullets right in front of everybody. And I was pretty sure that Law was too important to die here, but I'm not gonna lie, when this chapter ended, I was a tiny bit worried that Law might actually die, but it does end with him thinking to himself the name Khorasan, and this probably being the person that he mentioned about the ambition that he's trying to carry on. And so yeah, given that fact and the fact that he's this major character and this Khorasan and the ambition hasn't really been explored, I felt like there was a very small chance that he was actually going to die, but this was still shocking nonetheless when I and many other people saw this moment for the first time when this chapter was released. It was pretty crazy to see Law just because the way it's drawn, and in the anime it's not quite as apparent, but the way it's drawn in the manga, like the bullet impacts all hit Law square in the chest, and so that's where all his vital organs are. And so I think really what I thought about at the time when I read this is maybe that Law was able to use his shambles to maybe move the bullets away from his vital organs at least to keep him alive. But of course we won't find that out until the next episode. And this sets up yet another very tense cliffhanger with Law seemingly down for the count, and Doflamingo is now face to face with Zoro and Kinemon with Luffy there, but he's trapped inside the Colosseum, unable to do anything. So we'll have to wait till the next episode to discuss what happens next as the Dressrosa arc really continues to heat up more and more. And now that the main villain and our heroes are kind of face to face, we'll have to see how that plays out. But yeah, if you did enjoy this, send me a like or comment. And if you want to join me on this journey of rewatching One Piece, please consider subscribing. It really helps me out. And check out my Instagram at SunnyGo Podcast for updates of when I post new episodes, to see some pictures of my manga collection and card collection as well. And yeah, like I always say, just listening to the podcast is support enough for me. But if you like doing some extra supporting, feel free to visit my Buy Me a Coffee profile. And yeah, not required, but always appreciated. As always, I wanted to thank you for taking the time out to listen to my podcast. No spoiler section, but stay safe out there, and I hope to see you on the next episode. Bye!